Welcome to the latest edition of the Pro Football Focus IDP podcast, The Nickel. I am your host, Walton Spurlin, and once again, as we take a look back at Week 5 and a look forward to Week 6, I'm joined by one of the most brilliant minds in all of the IDP landscape, Mr. Ross Miles.
Wally, how you doing? It's good to be talking again this week. Definitely plenty of things to talk about.
Oh yeah, a lot of things went on Week 5. Not a whole lot of good things for our Lions and Rams, as fate would have it. Both teams going down and close games, but still, it's always disappointing when your favorite loses, eh, Russ?
It is. But I'm a Rams fan. Like as you said, I'm used to losing. So we had we could have won the game, to be honest. And we probably could have won against Washington as well. There's so many positives to take from this season. I don't see it as a downer. You know, when you go 4-12 most years, you know, the fact that we're in a position to be disappointed about a narrow loss to the Seahawks, is all plus side. You know, there's so many things I can be positive about. So I am not in a negative frame of mind. It's, disappointing, but definitely not negative.
Right, and the Lions made a bit of a run late in the game at the Panthers, but unfortunately weren't able to get it done. And of course now Matthew Stafford's a bit hobbled, but okay, that's enough of us lamenting our team's losses, and I'm actually a little more optimistic about your team than I am mine moving forward, but that's the Lions fan mentality, excuse me. All right, let's dive right in with some injury news, unfortunately, is the way we usually start things off, and we might as well start with the biggest name, and it's a tough one to see for a lot of reasons, but J.J. Watt suffered, it's got a really long one, left tibial plateau fracture. Anyway, whatever it was, it's season-ending, Ross, and talk a little bit about how that affects IDP moving forward.
Yeah, well, the main way it affects us is he's going to be owned in 100% of IDP leagues because it's J.J. Watt. He is the number one defensive line when you want to select your fantasy, and yeah, his loss is a major one. We're expecting it to, like you say, he's on IR. If he's not on IR, I think he already is. It's definitely gone for the season, and it's not going to be a quick recovery. You know, this is going to take a while. It's going to go on into the off season, so it's another disruptive year for JJ Watt. You know, I think you can ask the question: are we ever going to see JJ Watt back at the peak we've previously seen him at? And if we do see him back again playing, you know, where is he going to be? Is he still going to be the number one? I think these are questions that are going to have to be answered, but we're not going to have to wait till next season.
Right, and it's so unfortunate. And you know, he hadn't registered a sack yet. I was looking for a breakout game actually in that game against the Chiefs, and unfortunately it went sideways in a hurry. So, you know, J.J. Watt, I hope the best for him. The game's better with him in it than not, but unfortunately the NFL and fantasy is going to have to deal with yet another season with no J.J. Watt. And to further ruin the Texans' night, besides the loss, is they also lost outside linebacker Whitney Mercilus for the season with a torn pectoral. So that team is in need of somebody to step up. Yeah,
and you know, if you want to shine a positive on this, that Jadeveon Clowney is an elite player, and it's going to be his job to be causing the pressure up front for the Texans. Now, he's already had some good games this season. He's registered a few sacks, so you know, this is a player who I think is capable, but I know obviously it's going to be a different ballpark for him now because, you know, previously with Watt and Mercilus on the field, they were going to be garnering attention. Now they're going to be opponents are going to be able to clue in on Clowney and keep him marked or double marked. So he is the guy we're going to look to, but he's going to find it tough.
Right, and I'm just going to throw a name out there for people who maybe have J.J. Watt and your waiver wire is thin, and that would be a guy from the team, Ufamba Kamalu. This is his second year. I just noticed that he picked up 22 snaps, you know, last week, put up one solo tackle, you know, in Watt's absence, but he did have 2 QB hurries and a QB hit, and he actually had 1 sack last year. I'll be honest, it's not a name that I'm real familiar with, but I suppose if you're desperate, it's a name to keep an eye on for Houston to see if his role does increase. But again, Ufamba Kamalu, I just kind of like saying the name, but you know, just a tidbit for you there. And another tidbit is that Vic Beasley appears to be practicing again.
Yeah, which is great news. We're talking about these pass rushers going down. At least we're getting Vic Beasley back, because he is certainly an elite one. He was on the field wearing a helmet at the start of practice, so earlier this week on Monday. So we will expect him to get at least limited work. Whether he's going to actually get back on the field after what was deemed a slight hamstring tear, we'll have to wait and see. Definitely want to keep monitoring as the week progresses.
Right, yeah, because they could have a nice matchup for him, depending if he hits the field. I believe they have that Dolphins at home coming off the bye. So, here's hoping that Beasley gets back out there, because again, we needed some edge rushers with sack potential for our IDP purposes, and he's definitely that. So let's hope that he's back sooner rather than later. And somebody else who we're not sure when they're going to come back, and we'll kind of stay in the linebacker position, that's veteran Sean Lee, who's been battling a hamstring and didn't manage to play last week. So should we think? Well, they actually have a bye, but are we thinking he has a chance to return in week 6 or 7? Excuse me.
I haven't seen update, but hamstring. His absence has been extended, which has been an issue with him throughout his career. Obviously, very, very talented when on the field. Has often put up big tackle numbers, and we do expect that from him again when he returns. But with the week off, quite potentially he is back.
Right, and in his absence, they did get Anthony Hitchens back, who I don't believe had played, and I was interested to see how he would do. Modest numbers, 5 solos, 1 assist, and he had 6 total tackles, obviously. But he played 50 snaps, and a player we talked about a little bit last week, how his role was going to go, is Jalen Smith, and he saw his snap count drop to only 33. Is that something we should be concerned about?
I think to a degree. Obviously, we did think Hitchens would potentially cut into his playing time. I don't think we expected him to be an every down back and every down linebacker. But, he is someone we want to keep an eye on still. I don't think, redraft leagues, he's probably benchable, but in dynasty leagues, I still think he's worth grabbing.
Right, yeah, the kid hopefully still has a long career ahead of him after he battled back from that injury. But, it'll be interesting to see how things play out once Lee does return to the field. If Smith's snaps go down even more, then, as you said, in redrafts, let him go. Dynasty, if you do have the room, stash him, because, Lee is closer to the end of his career than the beginning. And speaking of another big name who wasn't able to go last week, and this one, I guess it shouldn't have caught me by surprise because he really didn't practice, but Olivier Vernon, defensive end from the Giants, was unable to go against the Chargers, and that you could tell that defensively definitely felt it. Yeah,
certainly. The Giants are not exactly having a great season. They are struggling, and one of their cores has been the fact they can generate a pass rush, and when you're missing someone you're paying so much money to, it's definitely disappointing. Obviously, it did snap an 84-game streak that Vernon had been on the field for, so he has been an ultra consistently healthy player, but this is coming at the worst time for a team that really needs something to get going. Pre-season we were talking maybe about the Jets having the number 1 overall pick. Now it looks like it's going to stay in New York potentially with the Giants.
Yeah, you're right about that, and we don't talk a lot about the offensive side of the ball, but boy, they are hurting for wide receivers. So if you're fast and you can catch the ball and you live in the New York area, you might want to swing on by and ask for the walk-on tryout. But yeah, that's hopefully again Vernon can go back. That team needs a spark, and I don't know if they're going to be able to turn it around. And as you said, Ross, they could be staring down the barrel of the number 1 pick. Now, another team that has just been devastated by injuries, especially on the defensive side of the ball, is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we'll talk about it. If you look at last week, Lavonte David out again with his ankle issue. Quan Alexander still dealing with a hamstring issue. And just to throw in as well, 2 of their top safeties, TJ Ward didn't play. He's got a hip issue. And I also believe Tandy sat out the game. So that they've got a lot of issues there, and I believe we touched on this player last week, but if we didn't, maybe it was on Twitter, but they certainly had a linebacker step up in the absence of the other 2 guys.
Yes, they did. Kendall Beckwith, I'm pretty sure you did name check last week, Wally, so hat tip to you for that one. He recorded 14 total tackles, and obviously that was in an every down role. If he is still on the waiver wire, some people may have caught on last week, but if they haven't, he's definitely worth adding. He's clearly going to be the go-to guy if any of these injuries linger for David or Quan Alexander. And an every down role is always a linebacker you want.
Right, and as you mentioned, with the injuries that David and Alexander have, an ankle and a hamstring, those can flare up again at any time. So, get Beckwith and hold on to him. Even if his role goes down a little, when those two return, he's worth stashing because, again, like I said, those kind of injuries, lower leg for that position, so many times, you're hit down low, you're blocked down low. So, grab Beckwith. And another linebacker we're hoping is going to finally return, and that would be Cleveland Browns linebacker Jamie Collins, who has missed multiple weeks with a concussion, but there's good news there on a couple of fronts.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, he has actually cleared the concussion protocol now, so we are just waiting for him to suit up and get on the field. So this week coming should be Jamie Collins' return, which is definitely a benefit for them. But talking about returns, there was certainly another one. The number 1 overall draft pick, Wally. He had a pretty good debut.
Oh, yeah. It took him a month to hit the field. I believe he's battling with an ankle or so. But, top pick Myles Garrett finally saw some action. It was limited action, and he certainly made the most of it, recording 2 sacks while playing only 19 snaps.
Yeah, that's some really, really good numbers. I did have a look at his pass rush productivity. He had 15 pass rush snaps, and I don't believe he had a hit or a hurry. So he was exceptionally good at converting the chances he did get. Obviously, this would make him a waiver wire grab if you're needing someone. So perhaps you've lost JJ Watt. This is, and if he's had 0 sacks as well, JJ, you probably aren't in the best of shape fantasy wise. So you might have a fair whack at Myles Garrett this week. He's someone we had told you guys to be aware of rather than aggressively pursue. Well, now we're saying pursue. He's on the field getting 2 sacks. He's someone you should be grabbing if you can.
Oh, absolutely. And, that snap count's only going to improve on a weekly basis as he gets healthier and then gets into game shape. I mean, they said before the game he'd be on a pitch count. I didn't think it'd be that low. But, again, it's going to go up on a weekly basis, and he has a very nice matchup this week as Cleveland plays that reeling Texans team that we touched on earlier with J.J. Watt, but they're still without left tackle Dwayne Brown, who's holding out. So that could be a positive matchup for Garrett. I hope I didn't step on I did step on our matchup section later on, Ross, but we'll get to that.
We're fine.
We'll call that a teaser. But anyway, what better way to segue into the defensive lineman position than touching on Myles Garrett there? And a couple of the Chargers in their first win of the season against the aforementioned woeful Giants, their top 2 defensive linemen, who we were both high on in the preseason, had very nice games. Yes,
they did. Melvin Ingram is on a bit of a sack tear. He added 2 last week, topped it off with a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. Grabbed 6 total tackles as well. This is someone we said, moving to defensive end in a 4-3 scheme now, this could really open the floodgates for Ingram. And he's already got 7.5 sacks this season. He only had 8 in all of last year. Obviously playing as an outside linebacker as well was no use to fantasy owners. He is certainly making his mark to be a top 10 defensive lineman. And his partner in crime, Joey Bosa, had an equally impressive performance.
Yeah, and this is something that I believe we touched on talking about Ingram either last week or the week before, is that the more he produces, the less teams are going to be able to double team or concentrate solely on Bosa. And I think that started to show itself last week because his stat line was very nice. 2 sacks, also 6 total tackles, as Ingram had, a fumble recovery, and he only has 4.5 sacks on the season. But you like the fact that he had 2 last week. I mean, this kid could go on a tear, and he's not only just a sack potential guy, but he's also doing pretty well in the tackle department.
He certainly is, yeah. If you look at his tackle numbers, he's got 29 total tackles on the season already. If you compare that to other defensive linemen, only if you're in a league where you get to class Khalil Mack as a defensive lineman do you have someone who's got more than him. So, those are an excellent baseline. So, for someone who we considered a true sack upside player, to have such a great floor because of his tackle totals is incredible. We're lamenting the loss of J.J. Watt, but Joey Bosa, is he the heir apparent to this number one defensive lineman spot?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and my immediate answer would be yes. And again, as I said, let's see what momentum he carries from that 2-sack performance, moving forward. And again, as we mentioned, Ingram can't be discounted. So we mentioned before the season, I believe, that these two could both finish in the top 10, and I still believe that's a definite possibility. So let's keep an eye on that dynamic duo moving forward. And another player we want to keep an eye on, and we were looking for somebody to step up with Cliff Averill out indefinitely with that severe stinger, which that could be a career-ending thing. We'll keep an eye on that for Averill. But Seattle was looking for somebody to step up, and they may have found someone. Indeed,
Frank Clark is someone who they've been working on for a few years. He's an impressive player when you see him play. Obviously, saw a lot of him last week up against the Rams. He notched up a sack, a forced fumble, and a forced recovery, topping it up with 3 total tackles now. His tackle numbers aren't great, but he is definitely a real sack artist. He is someone who's going to see his snaps increase. I believe he saw over 70% of snaps for the first time last week because Averill's not on the field. And as you pointed out, it is sounding more and more worrying for Averill. It could be a career ender, like you say. So that makes Frank Clark a huge grab on the waiver wire this week.
Exactly, and latest word out of Seattle is also Michael Bennett's dealing with a foot issue. He managed to finish the game. I mean, is it the dreaded plantar fasciitis? But I think he's going to continue to try and play. But again, he could be hampered, even further enhancing, Clark's role. So, grab him, and be ready to roll with him after. I believe Seattle, they're on their bye this week. If you got roster space, this is the great time to get him. People may be overlooking Seahawks on the waiver wire. Grab Clark, stash him. He should be sitting pretty moving forward after their bye. And speaking of sitting pretty, Kawan Short, the Carolina Panthers, had a pretty nice week last week. I saw firsthand against my Lions.
Yeah, he's a player who had a quieter start to the season. He has been highly impressive in spells for his fantasy owners. He notched up 2 sacks last week, topped up with a forced fumble, added 3 total tackles. So, he had a sack last week as well. So, perhaps he is finding his mojo and starting to run into a little bit of form.
Yeah, that defense in general looked very good against the Lions. I would say keep in mind that was against the Lions. Their offensive line is really struggling right now, and so here's some advice: start your defensive ends against the Lions, but still, again, you like guys who look to be building momentum that we know have shown that they can perform at this level, and Quan Short is definitely one of those players. It's one of those things where you got to have a little bit of patience, and then it pays off with a game like this. And then moving forward, I believe they have a Thursday night tilt with the Eagles. So, that could be a sack fest kind of game because the Eagles have been putting up some numbers lately too. And speaking of putting up numbers, somebody who I was really beginning to lose faith in, it seems like he might be coming out of a funk, and that's Jarrell Casey of the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, I just think he's worth a bit of a mention as a potential waiver wire grab. He's the kind of guy I think that people have lost, like you said, lost confidence in. He could well have been dropped. He's had 12 total tackles and 2 sacks over the last 2 weeks. He has been dealing with a back and a groin issue in separate incidents that have hampered his ability to get on the practice field and obviously be healthy. So, perhaps he's turned the corner. I think maybe I even cut bait with him in one league. So this is just potentially a note that he is someone who's going to be getting back into form. We've seen him have definitely DL2 scoring. Whether we maybe thought he could push into the DL1 territory, some maybe didn't. But he did shape up that way for a while, I think. So he has plenty of scoring potential if healthy and on the field.
Right, and as I mentioned, I've held on to him on my longtime IDP league, but I've yet to start him and sort of regret that over the last 2 weeks. But it is encouraging to see, and again, someone who's proven over the years that he can get it done. I believe you're right, Ross, that it was probably the injuries that were holding him back more, and now if it's a healthy Casey, it's a Casey that can definitely contribute to our IDP teams, and Well, we're going to move on to the linebacker position here, and I'll tell you what, a defense that's been playing pretty well is Jacksonville, and their duo of linebackers, which we've talked about a few times on podcasts, but they need mentioning again, and that would be Telvin Smith and not Paul Posluszny, but Miles Jack.
Indeed, yeah, both these guys had great games. 10 total tackles for Telvin Smith, plus a pick six. You know, he has been tearing it up through the first 5 weeks of the season. 38 total tackles, 3 splash plays. So he is certainly a guy who was cementing himself in the LB1 category. And as you said, Jack had a great game too. Yeah,
and it's good to see, because I early in the preseason, I'll admit I was kind of writing off Miles Jack. It seemed like they were just trying to find a position for him where he wouldn't look bad or wouldn't hurt the team. And then, boy, something clicked. And since week one, this has been somebody who's an every week start, and that's great to see. And another duo of linebackers that I know we were both high on heading into the season, and I'm going to turn this one over to you because it's near and dear to your heart. But the Rams have a duo that's really putting up some numbers.
Yeah, Mark Barron, 15 total tackles last week. He was all over the field. I felt like they were picking on him a bit, trying to find matchups. Their young running back, the third choice, I want to say McIvy, something along those lines. What's
McKissick, something along those lines.
McKissick, that's the one, yeah, McKissick. They were trying to get McKissick isolated against Barron at times and run him across the formation. So, plus, Barron is going to be getting his nose dirty when they run the ball, that kind of stuff. We did a good job of stamping that out. But yeah, 40 total tackles over the last 4 weeks. So the move from safety to outside linebacker has definitely regenerated his career. A quick mention for Alec Ogletree, someone who we certainly thought was going to be in contention for top linebacker this season. He hasn't quite been putting up the tackle numbers, obviously, with someone like Barron producing so heavily beside you. It isn't always easy. He only had 4 total tackles last week, but he did get a sack. I think, as much as anything, that was down to the scheming. We looked like we were spying Russell Wilson a fair bit, so Ogletree was generally in that duty, and I felt that that's probably one of the reasons he didn't rack up the numbers he usually did. So that is, depending on who your defensive coordinators are when you play Seattle, it's something you might want to consider.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because, again, a lot of times a player's production can be scheme-specific, and I didn't get a chance to watch that whole game, but as you astutely pointed out, if a lot of his job was to keep an eye on Russell Wilson, then, yeah, that was obviously going to free up Barron for more tackles, Ogletree for less, but, again, we'll take the sack. That always works out well. And the next player we're going to talk about is I was a week early in my start-sit column, as I believe in his first game back, I suggested starting Vontaze Burfict, where it was in his second game back that we got to see some vintage Burfict.
Indeed, yeah, back to the old ways, 13 total tackles and added a sack as well. And by old ways, I don't mean making late hits that gets him suspended. I mean just racking up lots and lots of points for his fantasy owners. He's back. He's someone I think that has a legit chance to be a top 5 linebacker rest of the season, because I don't think the Bengals are absolutely stunning, so they are going to see plenty of defensive snaps. I'm not the hugest of Dalton fans, although he did have a good week this week.
Right, and once again, Nick Vigil is still in play there. He obviously is still a 3-down linebacker there. It was Vincent Ray who ended up losing snaps. But Vigil, 9 total tackles last week, and the Bengals are on a bye in week 6. But tell you what, folks, you're going to want to get both those guys in your lineups in week 7, because they got a date with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that was the team that gave up all the tackles to Miles Jack and Telvin Smith last week, as well as 5 interceptions. Big Ben, a bit of a rough outing. But somebody who hasn't had too many rough outings this season and may finally have carved out a 3-down role for the Green Bay Packers. And this is somebody who I've personally been waiting to see if he could finally take this job. But talk a little bit about Blake Martinez and what he's been doing in the middle of that Green Bay defense.
Yeah, like you said, he has actually finally earned 3-down duties for the first time last week. So he has propelled himself well into the limelight for waiver wire pickups. I did recommend him maybe a week or two back, saying, the numbers he was putting up, it started to look like he was going to be given the opportunity, and he was. 12 total tackles last week and 30 over the last 3. So if he is available in your leagues, he is a must-add.
Right, yeah. And as somebody who I was expecting maybe these sort of numbers from last year, but he kind of was in a timeshare, and then nobody ever really took over that position between him and Jake Ryan. So it looks like Martinez may have finally won that job. So as you have that, he's a waiver wire grab. Get him. A linebacker that can put up those kind of tackle numbers is something that we're definitely looking for. And we're going to move on to the defensive back position and talk about somebody who's sort of been an old faithful and finally rewarded us, last week, and that's Miami's Rashad Jones.
Yeah, Rashad Jones is someone anyone who plays IDP fantasy football will be well aware of. He's an extremely productive player. He added 7 total tackles to his season tally last week, added half a sack, 2 fumble recoveries, one was for a touchdown as well. So I believe he would have been the top scoring defensive back in most formats last week.
Right, and he's always been a tackle producer for us, and we love to see the big plays added, and especially 2 fumble recoveries, and then obviously taking one to the house. So that's a big game for Jones. And you know what? Sometimes we may be wrong on a player for a stretch of time, and somebody that we both were kind of telling people to shy away from was Earl Thomas of the Seattle Seahawks. But you know what? If you were somebody who started Earl last week, you're feeling pretty good about yourself. You
are indeed, yeah. 7 total tackles, a forced fumble, and that was a huge play early in the first quarter, midway through the first quarter. He caused a fumble from Todd Gurley on the 1-yard line that ended up being a touchback and preventing the Rams scoring points on a red zone drive, one of many times. Also had an interception on an important Rams drive, so he really was a drive killer. But yeah, fantasy-wise, Thomas has been a bit of a conundrum in the past. I still think you should sell on Thomas. That's the position I'd be taking on all known evidence. Earl Thomas, more times than not, is not a fantasy performer. That's just because of the way he plays a deep free safety role. Yes, he's obviously had 2 really important splash plays, but they don't come along every single week. Right now, Thomas is sitting pretty in the fantasy rankings. I would sell for as much as you can.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I agree wholeheartedly. The unfortunate thing is that Seattle's on a bye week, so probably people wouldn't have the red hot interest they would if they had another matchup coming right away. But still, yeah, put the feelers out there, see what people are willing to give up for Earl Thomas, because as you said, more likely than not, he's going to have less of these games, and he does need those splash plays to really make him relevant. And again, those are very hard to predict. Unfortunately, they came against your Rams this time, but another player who's actually been putting up some splash plays, and maybe not as many tackles as I thought in his new home, but he's definitely starting to contribute from a fantasy standpoint, and that's safety Barry Church of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, I've been looking at his numbers, and like you say, his tackle totals have been down a little bit, which is something we certainly weren't predicting. We fully expected him to have very similar numbers to how he had in Dallas, perhaps even increasing them, because obviously he was replacing Jonathan Cyprien in that Jags defense. But a pick 6, you can't sniff at. That would have definitely sorted you out if you started him, and obviously many of you would if you had drafted him.
Right, and in the last 2 games he does have 11 total tackles, and in week 4 he managed a sack. So again, another big play, splash play, if you will. But yeah, the interception, not interception totals, the tackle totals are a bit concerning, but to me, it's still too early to give up on Barry Church. This guy's proven in the past he can do it. That Jaguars defense is playing excellent football at all 3 levels, so I believe he's going to still be a contributor to us fantasy-wise, and I believe his teammate was quite a contributor for us last week fantasy-wise as well.
Yeah, to Sean Gibson. He has been a very productive player if you're looking for those who make interceptions in bunches in the past. He's had 18 in his career, 2 in the last game, and that's 3 on the season now. He padded his stats with 6 total tackles, but in all honesty, for me, he's someone I'd be wary of in fantasy. If you look at, I said he's made 18 interceptions in his 6 NFL career seasons, but I think he had 6 in one and 5 in another. So, he does have a couple of good those 2 seasons. I think he was borderline fantasy relevant, maybe a DB2 at best. So he's going to need to keep this kind of pace up, really. He's got to have plenty more interceptions for me to consider him an add in fantasy.
Exactly, yeah. The splash plays are nice, but they are hard to predict. He has 13 total tackles over the last 2 weeks, but again, he sort of relies on the big plays, and that's a kind of a boomer bust mentality. And generally, there's players out there that you can find that are a bit more consistent. But I'll tell you, somebody stepped up last week at safety for the New York Giants, and it's not the name you would think.
Yeah, Darian Thompson recorded 11 total tackles and added an interception. Not a bad game. I think this is probably a guy that is worth grabbing on the waiver wire as maybe a slightly more optimistic play. I'm not suggesting you start him every week, but if you haven't got a strong bench, you can't really sniff at guys that put up double-digit tackles in any given week at safety. So grab him, monitor him, and if he starts continuing to make these kind of performances, you can plug him in.
Exactly, and it's just interesting. I took a look back. Obviously, if somebody puts up those numbers, I wanted to see, well, what did he do in week 4? And surprisingly, he put up a goose egg and only played 37 snaps. Now, I haven't been able to find out if he left that game with an injury, because prior to that, he was also playing a major amount of the snaps. But it just shows how, as we've talked about the defensive back position, how it can be, and sort of talking about Gibson, just not boom or bust. Goes from a goose egg to 11 total tackles. But as you said, anytime you see somebody put up double digits, they're worth grabbing on the waiver wire, especially for a defense that's struggling, a team that's struggling. The Giants look to be probably trailing in games quite a bit, and teams are going to run the ball quite a bit. And if Thompson's able to get up there and help and run support, they've also got Landon Collins, obviously. But again, anybody puts up those numbers, grab them. And I'll tell you, this last guy, he's just surprising me. This last defensive back we'll touch on, he's surprising me with the tackle numbers he's putting up. And I honestly didn't expect it last week, and that's Devin McCourty of the Patriots.
Yeah. Colour me surprised as well. 11 total tackles. That is 3 weeks in a row where this guy's hit double digits. Now, I haven't done the research, but I'd be surprised if he'd done that before in his career. He's a player to me who I would normally associate with, maybe 50, 60, at top 70 total tackles a season. He's going to get his points for interceptions and a couple of splash plays like that. But wow, he has been a tackle producing player so far this season. He is, that consistency over the 3 games make him a must add. If he is still hanging around on your waiver wire, you have to get him, at least to stop someone else getting him, even if you can't play him.
That's a good point, and I'll admit it, I've been wrong about him. I actually believe I had him in my part of my start-sit last week, just because I thought it was an aberration. I'm like, there's no, as you said, I don't know for certain either how many times in his career he's gone double-digit tackles. But the fact that neither one of us can remember that means it hasn't been a lot. So I'm like, he can't do it again. It's like Jaws. He can't go down with 3 barrels. But, McCourty has proven me wrong. So as you said, he's a waiver wire add. And, yeah, plug him and play him as long as he's hot like this. Because, it's not just, you can't say it's a surprise anymore. It's a trend. And so now let's move on to the matchup section and talk about some positive, negative matchups heading into Week 6, and we touched on Myles Garrett. It's a nice matchup with Houston, but a couple of other players on that team could also benefit from that matchup.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. The Texans have been one of the most beneficial matchups for opposing edge rushers, so Emmanuel Ogbah is someone we've also picked out for you before, and I think this is definitely a week you want to plug him in if you own him. And obviously if you're holding 2 potential top 5 defensive ends, you might pass him by then, but Ogbah I think is a top 15 defensive end maybe this week. He could definitely score that way, and again, I know he comes from the inside, but Jamie Collins, if you can have success rushing against the Texans and Jamie Collins is back on the field, he is a dynamic playmaker as well as a tackle producer, so he should definitely have a second. Well, you're going to start him, but definitely start him even though it is his first week back.
Right, excellent suggestions. Yeah, that's the Texans team's in some trouble, and giving up points to the D line and defensive players in general. And the Eagles have another nice matchup this week, and we can look for some big production from quite a few Eagles. Touch on that, those players you like.
Yeah, the Panthers have been a superb matchup for opposing edge rushers. So there's one certain name you want to clue in on, and that's going to be Brandon Graham. He is a very talented edge rusher, and he's put up points before. He can have a multi-sack performance for sure. I think, I don't want to say scraping the barrel is not quite the right word, but, in deeper leagues, or, the people you might want to look at if you're struggling for scorers would be someone like maybe Vinny Curry, former Ram Chris Long, and rookie Derek Barnett. I don't think any of them is particularly outstanding, but like I said, deeper leagues, these guys could potentially have one of their few sacks of the season this week.
Exactly, and those are excellent points to make, especially with bye weeks and the injuries that have occurred. Because obviously this week we're out without the Dallas Cowboys, so no DeMarcus Lawrence. Cincinnati, no Carlos Dunlap. Buffalo, Jerry Hughes. And then looking at Seattle, Michael Bennett, Frank Clark. So yeah, those names are all great names that you mentioned. Who plug and play, get through your bye weeks. And somebody else who it's got a bit of a positive matchup in a divisional game is Muhammad Wilkerson.
Indeed, Wilkerson against the Patriots now. Brady has not been as clean as he usually has this season. That O-line has let him take a few whacks. So Muhammad Wilkerson is someone who will certainly be looking to feast. And the Jets-Patriots is often a fairly spicy game in the first place. So they'll be definitely looking to make an impact. So put Wilkerson in your team if you haven't been so far this season.
Yeah. He's had a slow start, but this could be the jump start for him. And I'm going to go off script and just throw one more name in there, just because I mentioned the Lions' offensive line is really struggling. They've given up 12 sacks in the last 2 games. Cameron Jordan's got an excellent matchup. The Lions have given up 8 sacks to defensive linemen in the last 2 weeks. So that's somebody else who I like. I'll throw that one in there. And some guys that might have a little bit rougher way to the quarterback this week or getting fantasy points is Jabal Sheard.
Yeah, obviously, again, we're trying to make sure we're not just telling you to drop your studs, because you pretty much can't. That's the way fantasy works. But if Jabal Sheard's one of your fringe players and you're thinking about starting him, you definitely shouldn't. The Titans have been one of the worst matchups you can find so far this season. Sheard is someone who's got to be riding the bench for you this week.
Yeah, excellent advice. And the Rams have been pretty stingy when giving out points to the defensive line. So who should we maybe look to avoid this week from in their matchup with the Jaguars?
Yeah, definitely true. The Rams have been stingy. It is very strange seeing a clean pocket and a quarterback manage to hold on to the ball for 2.5+ seconds. So yeah, this week we travel away to Jacksonville. So Dante Fowler is someone who, if you were considering starting, you might want to rethink. And then, ready for the pronunciation, Yannick Ngakoue.
Ngakoue.
It's close. Yannick Ngakoue. The guy's been on fire this season, but the Rams have been doing great jobs of shutting down the pass rush of opposing teams, even very productive teams like Seattle. So I think both these guys are going to be sitting on the pine if you're a fantasy owner of either of them.
All right, I believe the Rams also they shut down DeMarcus Lawrence as well, I believe. So yeah, those are guys to go. Yep.
He had one, but
did he? Okay. Yeah. Well, the way he's been playing, that's almost shutting him down. But another player who's been off to a hot start that's maybe going to have a bit of a negative matchup is Justin Houston.
Yeah, indeed. Again, we said this is about edge rushers as much as it is defensive ends. So if you're in a big play league where you start Justin Houston from his outside linebacker position, the Steelers surprisingly haven't been the greatest of matchups. Obviously Big Ben's been getting it out, but throwing interceptions rather than taking sacks. So Justin Houston's one you might want to reconsider if you were going to start him.
Exactly, and we're gonna skip over this next guy because once again, you've put John Bostic on this list. And while the Colts do play this week, do we like him against Tennessee?
I think John Bostic is a player who's just been scoring points full stop this season as a 3-down linebacker. I'm still trying to get my head around it. So yeah, I think John Bostic, if you own him, if you're taking a plunge, I don't see why you wouldn't plug him in.
You know what's ironic is that if John Bostic were still on the Bears, he'd be pretty much the last linebacker standing. They lost another backup linebacker, probably like their 4th linebacker who was in last night. I can't even remember his name, but now he's out with a high ankle sprain. Christian Jones is still there, but he's not doing anything. I bet the Bears never thought they'd say this, but I bet they miss John Bostic right now.
Yeah, they probably do. That's probably why I keep putting him there. They need him.
That's it. You're wishful thinking.
Yeah, I'm looking at some other names potentially. Is Danny Trevathan past his suspension now? You know, he's there at the Bears still. So
that's right.
Yep, and Leonard Floyd. I know he's an edge rusher as well as a linebacker, but yeah, you know, he had 6 total tackles and 2 sacks this last week gone. So maybe he's a guy you'd want to consider. But yeah, Christian Jones is probably the main guy.
And I like this next game that you're touching on, and it's just almost like a spoiler alert for my start-sit article that I'm currently working on. But there's a couple of Tennessee Titans that have a juicy matchup.
You know, like we said, can't tell you to start your studs. So if you're looking a little bit deeper, Wesley Woodyard, Avery Williamson, it is a plus matchup. So these are 2 guys you would want to consider. You know, they hopefully could hit double-digit tackles this week. You know, they're normally guys for 6, 7. But yeah, this week is a week you might want to play them if you're starting 3 or 4 linebackers.
Right, and again, we've got a few good linebackers, you know, out this week. Bobby Wagner, obviously. Sean Lee, even though he's hurt, probably not there. Cincinnati, no Burfict, no Vigil. Buffalo, no Preston Brown. But, okay, we got about 4 minutes to go, so I'll pick up our pace, but we have another big-name linebacker with a nice matchup. Yeah,
C.J. Mosley for the Ravens. Obviously, we've touched on the Bears matchup already, but yeah, Mosley has been a stud so far this season, and I think he could potentially threaten to be the top-scoring linebacker this week.
Yeah. Oh, and again, he probably falls in that start your stud things, but especially so this week. And some down matchups, and a veteran out in Arizona, who's going to be joined by another veteran, Adrian Peterson now, but we're not too high on Carlos Dansby this week.
No, Dansby, Dansby's a player who, you know, he's probably on the fringes of whether you start or sit. I had recommended him as a pickup on the waiver wire article, but this is a negative matchup for him, so I think you can avoid him this week.
Yeah, and another confounding situation, and I'm not even sure why it played out this way, but this is probably a good week to avoid Corey James.
Yeah, Oakland have a bad matchup against the Chargers, who just haven't allowed points really to off-ball linebackers. But more confusing, as he kind of touched on, Corey James only played 34 snaps last week. Markel Lee played 31. Tyrell Adams and Nicholas Morrow both saw, you know, over 30 snaps each, I think. So not only should you not be playing them for the matchup, I am scratching my head as to what's going on. We need to see a little bit more data, so let's just pass on all of those guys this week.
All right, a wait-and-see situation advised there until it plays itself off. And I was very high on James until this situation reared its ugly head. So, yeah, that's sound advice. We'll wait and see. Let's move on to defensive back position. And a couple of veterans that have produced for us in the past are lined up to have another big week against the Bears.
Yep, if you own Eric Weddle or Tony Jefferson, you are probably both starting them. But, yeah, I think they both have potential DB1 numbers coming for them this week. So if you only start one defensive back in your league, I would make one of these two potentially one of those guys.
Right, and we've got a rookie who's really starting to step up. I think he's coming off a 9 total tackle performance, and somebody that I've been particularly high on. That it's nice to see those tackles numbers go up, and they should rise even more this week as he takes on the Patriots. That's Jamal Adams.
Indeed. Jamal Adams is someone who we talked about last week as being in a negative matchup. At the same time, we had obviously flagged him as someone who was spending a lot of time in the box. He had a high percentage of his plays within 8 yards of a line of scrimmage when they were running the ball against the Jets. So although we said he wasn't a negative matchup, he was in the position to make tackles. So, you know, this is going to be even better for him. Expect double-digit tackles.
Right. So get Adams in your lineup, and we don't really know who'll be at safety for the Buccaneers, but whoever it is should have a pretty plus matchup going against the Arizona Cardinals.
Indeed, yeah. Chris Conte is a guy who's sort of flirted with fantasy relevance for multiple seasons now, flirting between different teams. I think if you've got him on your roster this week, he is a potential start. I wouldn't say definite. The first thing you want to go do is check whether TJ Ward is playing. If TJ Ward's on the field, I would probably avoid Chris Conte. TJ Ward, of course, would be a start even in his return. He is, you know, a solid DB2, and he's going to have a plus matchup if he's on the field.
Right, that's an excellent point. And if Tandy were to miss and T.J. Ward were to miss again, a name to keep in mind, Justin Evans put up 9 total tackles and an interception last week. That would be, just be vigilant was the word I was looking for, with keeping track of who is active or inactive for Tampa. And if you're in a bind, if they both miss, Ward and Tandy again, as you said, Conti's a good start and Evans isn't a bad start. But a couple of guys that fantasy owners are probably leaning on this year that could be bad starts for Minnesota.
Yeah, unfortunately, they are playing the Packers, and Aaron Rodgers is exceptionally good at keeping the ball away from people he doesn't want it to be near, and that's going to be Harrison Smith and Andrew Sanjeho this week. Unfortunately for Smith owners, unless you're in a really shallow league, or again a league where you only start one defensive back, Smith is probably going to be in your lineup, but maybe temper your expectations. If you have got a way of replacing him, you might want to consider doing it. Sandejo, I think you certainly would want to replace if you own him.
All right, and I do in quite a few leagues, so I will definitely be heeding your advice and looking to find a replacement in this negative matchup. And that brings us to the end of our Week 5 review, Week 6 preview. So I'm going to turn it over to the co-host with the most to take us on home.
Indeed, Wally, it was a pleasure as always. I'm already looking forward to next week's show. Hopefully, we'll have some stories to break out after the demise of JJ Watt. But until next week, adios amigos.